Thank you so much for being here this morning. My name is Amiko Matsuo. I am Assistant Professor of Fine Arts here at Allan, Hancock College. I'm part of the 3D area, and I'm here to welcome you to this event. This is Made in Santa Maria, Creative Entrepreneurship Symposium. I'm here to introduce Sarah Filley, who is our special guest today. She is the CEO and co-founder of Popuphood, and she is a uniter of cities, developers, and artists to transform vacant retail spaces. Her social business emphasizes creative engagement, creative placemaking, and strategic partnerships. Filley has co-created seminars for California College of the Arts. She sits on the Business and Economic Development Advisory Committee for the California State Assembly, and she's also served as a judge for the 2014 NEA Our Town Grant. She is here because she stands at so many borders as a translator, a connector at a time when we desperately need points of connection. So thank you and welcoming Sarah Filley.
Thank you, Amika, for organizing this and for inviting me here. Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be here. Had a chance to check out the winery last night and a few other cool spots in Old Town, so that's one of my favorite things, is to come and explore a new place. Today I'll be talking about making cities through creative entrepreneurship. I want to talk about how to build a maker city, and I think that there's, it's such an intersection of people who are working with their hands, people who are artists, people who are producers, engineers. So when we talk about a maker city, we want to talk about a term that's inclusive of everyone. Not everyone identifies as an artist, and not everyone identifies as an entrepreneur. So maker is a really good invitation to all types of different people who are doing all types of different things in the city. One of the things about the maker mindset is that it's not just about making things, it's about remaking systems. And in that way, there's an opportunity to remake cities themselves. So we look at how the tinkering and the aspects of creativity and the aspects of making your work in a studio is perfecting a craft, and that craft then is allowing you to make mistakes, fail, and experiment, and look towards building up your expertise as a master. And you can apply those same skills, experimentation, aspects of risk, to entrepreneurship. There's a really nice mapping over into entrepreneurship. And that maps over again into how we can look at our cities as makers. So the craft of cities is something that is an odd new idea, but I think that it's fitting for today when we're talking about Made in Santa Maria. And I think it's a way for policymakers, institution, educational areas, and also arts organizations and actual artists to think about how craft can start to influence the making of our cities. Etsy is a really good example that I wanted to bring up because they really look at creating that pipeline of craft to entrepreneurship. And I think there's a lot of ways in which looking at creative entrepreneurs, we can, as cities, look also at creating that pathway to prosperity through policy, through spaces, through repurposing our industrial areas. These are all ways that we can better articulate the pathways to prosperity, but also create a pipeline for entrepreneurs who are maybe in their garage or somewhere in this campus, and there's a way for them to become vendors, participate in maker fairs, and then slowly move towards pop-ups, maybe a retail truck, a pop-up, a brick and mortar. And in that way, these micro-entrepreneurs are tomorrow's job creators through this pipeline. So cities can do a lot to help articulate what that pipeline is when they communicate to entrepreneurs. Universities can do a lot to articulate that to their workforce development programs and their trade programs. and really looking asymmetrically at how some of those things might intersect to create that clear and articulate pathway. So these are some of the tenets of a maker city. And I think they're a really good starting point. There's maker best practices, there's creating a maker liaison, there's creating a maker roundtable, which is probably a lot of people that are going to be here today. There's maker fairs, there's maker spaces, there's a maker manual that you can put together, and there's also strategies for education and workforce development. There's maker business development. We saw some good examples of the co-working spaces yesterday. There's also ways to support makers in struggling areas, and there's ways to make it even better. So Popuphood, we really focused on the maker strategies in those struggling areas. And our mission really is to work together to invest in entrepreneurs who really have hearts of gold to then create the communities that we love. And that was how we started, and that's our mission today. And we launched our business incubator in 2011. We were the first retail incubator in the US at that time. And the block by block philosophy, we really started on one block in one part of one city in Oakland. It was a very granular, hyper-local approach to a citizen-led initiative. And our goal was to transform a lot of the vacancies in Oakland at the time to vibrant retail shops. And we believed that, unlike the typical approach of economic development at the time, where you cast out for big stadium projects, big capital improvement, waterfront projects, the ways in which we started to aggregate our creative entrepreneurs, our friends and our artists together had a really major economic impact when we focused it really local. So the key for us was to incubate independent retailers, and we thought that that was a way to catalyze local economic development, not just fill vacancies. This slide is Umami Mart, so they were one of our first pop-ups, and they are now very successful, and they do a lot in the community, and they've done some really innovative things with retail as well, including changing the local zoning to include their selection of sakes and Japanese beer imports, which typically is under a liquor license, but they're far from a liquor store, a corner store. So they've had to be really innovative to keep building their model as well. So one of the ways we transform the vacant to vibrant is through pop-ups, which is just an interim, temporary activation of a space. It could be a retail space, it can be an empty lot, it can be a brownfield, it can be a base redevelopment project. We've really looked at a variety of different ideas of what's vacant, what's dormant, what are some latent assets in different cities, and looked at how we can do these short-term, interim activations. From a leasing standpoint, we look at pop-ups as like 3 to 5 months. It's a real sweet spot. It gives the entrepreneur enough time to test out their marketing, test out their business model, test out their location. It also gives them a little bit of time to build up the equity in their business. This is Marion and Rose, and she's an example of a pop-up to permanent as well, so she's been there for about 6 years. And she was really such a great choice because she had built up, as a community member in Oakland, like a really deep relationship with all these different vendors and makers. And so her store is 100% independent vendors and makers from all over the country. So there are some significant advantages to pop-ups for creative entrepreneurs. It's very low cost and low risk. And as I said, you can test your business model. So we worked very strategically to lower as many barriers as we could for these entrepreneurs to come into this neighborhood. It was an inverse. Usually cities have attraction strategies. They're trying to get retailers to their city. We looked within and found all the genius creatives that we already had in Oakland and gave them an opportunity. So we gave them 6 months free rent. We gave them $500 for a sign. And we said, make this whole neighborhood work. So it was 6 businesses in Old Oakland clustered together in one block. Part of the key to the success of this first prototype project was the speed in which we did it. It was a pilot project in partnership with the City of Oakland. So from idea to the grand opening, it was 3 months. At that time, California had redevelopment money. So we took a lot of that money and used it to hire photographers, graphic designers, and we really focused a lot on the marketing, not just of our project, but of Oakland itself. They had really not seen a lot of positive press in 30 years. So in 2011, Oakland really had a perception issue, and we loved our city so much, so our marketing was just a really authentic way of telling the story of Oakland and what we loved about our city and what we thought was amazing about all the entrepreneurs we were working with. It also did a lot to reposition Old Oakland as a place where people really wanted to rediscover. It's a beautiful part of town, 1890s infrastructure, the original business center of Oakland. Mature trees, brick sidewalks, all the things that outdoor malls are trying to duplicate now. It was just empty. So the marketing was really about other people discovering Oakland and seeing it in a new light, but it was also about connecting to the citizens of Oakland and how they rediscover a neighborhood that they forgot about. And the result of all this marketing was some of these entrepreneurs in the first 3 months of their pop-up were seeing a lot of value from their online sales being in these national newspapers and getting national press. So it was a way to help with their investment in their business towards that goal of signing a long-term lease. So if you can imagine opening your store and being in the New York Times in 3 months, like everybody was really excited, and it was really starting to create a lot of like multiplier effects in that one community, and it was very successful in terms of cluster economics because they were all so highly concentrated in one block. And at that time, there really wasn't a different retail area in Oakland. It was just, that was the one place you went to shop locally for the first time outside of galleries. So because we have a mission, a lot of our entrepreneurs are also mission driven. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about a couple of entrepreneurs who are just doing fantastic work and how we can rethink about retail, not just as an economic development tool, but also as a placemaking strategy. So Regina's Door is an amazing example of a woman who, on the face of it, wanted to open up just a vintage shop. And we gave her 500 square feet to do that. But behind her simple idea for a store, she had a huge mission, which she understood that retail and that first 20 feet of a sidewalk is where the community comes in. It's where when you go to a new city, it's the first thing you do is look around and shop and poke your head into the shops. And retail is the way that you can kind of see the community in a different way. Often nonprofits that have social mission are on the 32nd floor of a major city, and it's not as visible to the community. So she understood that by just opening the doors of her retail shop, she could welcome in some very vulnerable youth populations who were at risk or had been sex trafficked. And she made that her mission to just have that retail space be a space where anyone could come and just be. And then she built on some training and some programs and connecting with other nonprofits to support and get these kids safely out of that life. So she's done theater workshops with these kids. She uses their vintage to do costumes, and she trains them in all aspects of theater, all aspects of retail. Some of them are connecting with technology in Oakland. So just by having that open door and being kind of a welcoming mama bear, she has really transformed so many of these kids' lives and has gotten national press. She does trainings for the OPD. It's just a beautiful example of a really simple 500 square feet making such a huge impact in the city. Another sort of retail with a mission that I want to highlight and a different way that we worked with the developer is the Berkeley project, the Black Squirrel, and very relevant to crafters in the room. She had a really simple idea as well. Like, I just want to take my huge Stitch and Bitch community to a brick and mortar and have a place where the community can meet and come and buy all the things they need to craft. Great. But we built out this space specifically for a pop-up program. And so after 5 years of working with different retailers, we knew that part of supporting the maker community is building the right spaces for them. And so we built a back of house where she could have classes and workshops, and there was a catering sink, and a gallery. So it was a very multifunctional space, but it allowed for her to support her community so they could come and learn these new skills, they could meet each other, and then the front of the house, she sold all locally dyed yarns, small batches from farmers, and even like vegetables and farm stands that she knew they were using vegetable dyes and locally sourced wool to make these really small batch dyes. So she's like one of the main places in the country really specializing in those small batches and like bringing them all under one roof and then bringing people's attention to what she calls the like farm to yarn and like yarn shed movement. So, you know, we never know what entrepreneurs and like these retailers are gonna suggest to us as ideas, but by being open to risk and experimentation, we get brilliant things like this. So she was hugely successful in her first 2 months and signed a long-term lease soon after that. So the space was well suited for her purpose, but she also had an idea that connected people not just to craft and to each other, but to this bigger idea of environmental sustainability through making. So these are ways in which retail starts to come outside of its borders of their limited square footage and really into the community. And I think it's, you know, there's different facets. Like, we consider what we do placemaking. We invite retailers to be a part of that, but we've also done some projects around plazas, brownfield, base redevelopment, and even planning efforts where we try to bring artists into the process of city making and planning for, you know, the next 10, 20 years of cities. It's not an easy process, but the creativity that's needed to help engage citizens is really necessary to ground very technical conversations around planning and the built environment of your city to support makers and people who are creative, and all citizens, youth, old people. So artists have a unique ability to participate and ground those conversations in ways that are a little bit more asymmetrical and a little more heart-centered. So we're not just talking about how high a building is, but we're really talking about the length of time it takes a senior to walk across the street and like ways in which kids can feel okay in public space, and how can we reintroduce commerce in the commons and these marketplaces that are some of the oldest definitions of cities. So we see placemaking as a broad umbrella activity, like a verb, about how we can get people involved in our cities. And like I said, we do that to sort of support our retailers. We look broadly at how marketing is a part of sharing those stories and these details around creative enhancements, and really deepen engagement. And so all these things come together to make what we call our pop-up to permanent program. And so we work with cities and with realtors, real estate developers, to like join in this conversation and really understand that they can contribute to this process in a really meaningful way. So one of the things that we look at when we talk about placemaking is how to like look at a place and understand it better and faster. And permaculture has a very unique methodology to offer us to do that. Permaculture looks at functions, and it asks, what is the function of something? So when we look at the function of cities, we want to feel connection, we want to make a living, and we want to feel safe. And so permaculture looks at all these other functions that contribute to those three main things that cities can do. And so I invite you to, when we're looking at a site that we want to do a placemaking project in, whether it's 800 square miles or a small retail space, looking at which area we're focusing on is really helpful. So for example, Popuphood, we look at community, we look at wealth, and livelihood, and there's a social justice element as well to what we're doing. So it's helpful to know where you are on this cute leaf wheel. And I think a lot of artists, maybe could focus on, solving some of these other areas of functionality that our cities are really challenged by: water, shelter, and even the spiritual side of our communities. One of the ways that we can test out our theories, like, okay, this is our function, here's our creative process, a low-risk way to test out some of these ideas is through prototyping. And we can experiment as a community in a public place in a low-risk way. One thing you get into really quickly as a maker, let's say you're like, yeah, I'm remaking these systems, like I'm excited, is this idea of like, okay, we all have to work together. So this idea of interoperability comes into play, where you have a public, private, maybe an institution. They all have very different workflows and very different ways of working. So sometimes what we get into is like trying to just mash up these things. And you can get something kind of ugly and weird and confusing. And this is a really brilliant example of, this artist did this project where he wanted to play with all the games at once. And so he realized that, oh, the systems of connectivity are different. There's different vocabularies for each of these games. Like Legos is different from Tiddlywinks, is different from all these other examples here. If you have kids, I'm sure you can recognize most of these. And so the idea of this collaborative idea and interoperability when you're thinking about systems in cities is really interesting, because these connection points, these edges, these like sort of marginal areas, either in systems or policies or physical spaces, is where permaculture said we have the richest innovation potential, we have the richest reward on these edges. So trying to figure out how to connect something is where all the innovation can happen. So what he did was he kind of like worked with this as a prototype, and he came up with the whole toolkit, 3D printed toolkit. And I just love this as a metaphor for how we're trying to work in cities and how we're trying to think of transforming cities and kind of where we are right now in the shift of a lot of old systems that just aren't serving tomorrow's workers, they're not serving today's artists, and they're really not positioning our cities for success. So think about what your 3D printed universal toolkit would be in whatever sector you're in order to successfully work with another sector. So that's like what I call a hard transformation metaphor, but there's a soft transformation metaphor, which is about imaginal discs. And I think artists really are those imaginal discs in a society. It's this thing inside of us that we don't know what we're going to turn into when we transform. So butterflies have these little imaginal discs, and then they turn into goop. And to them, it feels like a death. It's the death of a butterfly. But sometimes transformation, even though it feels like everything's going wrong, and as an artist, you kind of know that moment when you're working and this experiment just isn't working, it feels like a total failure, and then something will emerge out of that. And so what can emerge is this little programmed imaginal disc that says, well, you're gonna be a butterfly, you're gonna sprout wings, and I think that out of this goop is like a whole new genetic program that arises. And so I think we're in that space sometimes when we really press for real transformation. It's very painful and difficult for communities sometimes because it feels like something's dying. And so that's a good metaphor for how artists can like imagine beyond the blank page and beyond the blank canvas in a way that that's our training. So we're okay with ambiguity, and we're okay with like, we don't know what's happening, but we're going to use prototyping and experimentation to sort of lead us there, and we're going to see what emerges. And so I think that the revolution will be prototyped. Thank you, Jake, for this. So I'm going to leave it there and open it up for questions. Thank you.
We chatted yesterday about the Maker City concept, and we chatted about the Made in Santa Maria concept and how our goal is to take this beginning now and to really grow it. And so, besides buying the book and reading the book as a roadmap, your suggestion for us as a community would be for our next steps. How do we take the passion that we have for pulling this concept together? How do we infect other people? Right? How do we infect those who need to be infected?
Yeah.
Right? Like the leaders of the community, how do we help them understand how important this is to our community? Just continue to lead by example? Or is there like an injection we can give?
Yeah. I think there's like a lot of different approaches. The approach that Popuphood has is always like understanding there's a bell curve. Like not every property owner wants to do our program, right? Even though there's a lot of financial benefits and community benefits, and it's a pretty proven model at this point. So we just understand that innovation has a bell curve. There's really early adopters at the beginning who are like, sure, yeah, why not? Then there's people who are like, I'm going to wait and see how that works, and then maybe I'll try it. Then there's people who are waiting for like success at the top of the bell curve. Then there's some people on the backside that are just like, yeah, I'm just doing something else. Like they'll never adopt it. Like they just won't participate. So instead of exhausting ourselves trying to go after the people who are on the end of the bell curve, we just always start with the people who are excited to work with us and who get it, and that way we're not exhausting ourselves. So I think there's people in this room is a great start. There's people who are excited about the future of Santa Maria, and people who are really committed to the town. And I think there's youth who have tons of energy, and there's people in probably the city government and different organizations that are committed to supporting any efforts. I think that, we talked a little bit over wine about some strategies where, you want to try to create a culture of like radical permission. And sometimes you have to carve out a secret space in the city for that to happen, right? So if it's not like a public sanctioned thing, maybe it's somewhere on this campus, just a location that is permission oriented, and then work with streamlining all those processes so you can get to that rapid experimentation. Because once you tell people it's temporary, then they're less invested in this one thing representing all the things they want in the city. So it kind of like makes everybody a little bit more relaxed, and it's hard. Risk is hard, prototyping is hard, making things is hard. People have lots of ways in which they need to get over those barriers. So just the art institutions, the city planning office, it took a lot of time to get that sort of where it is today. But find a little piece of, wherever it is, whatever you can get a yes, and then just start there.
So celebrate those yeses. And I think that I may expand on your recommendation for that book, for the Maker City book that you recommended yesterday. And I think the Business Development Center might buy copies of that book for all the city council members.
Yeah.
Gift it to them.
And within that, so if you go online, there's the Maker's Mayoral Challenge, so the city can really adopt that. I think there's a lot of starting to be infrastructure that cities can borrow that help create like a plan.
Yeah, I really appreciate your input. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Sarah, this is really great. Now, have you in your past approached brand new developments with unleased space and approached the developer or the owner of that property to see if perhaps you could lease that space out until a tenant came in?
Yeah, I mean, that's primarily, we've done some repurposed spaces, right. And the project in Berkeley with the Black Squirrel fabrics, that was a new build. And that was an interesting project because it was a luxury residential kind of at the edge of Berkeley. So it was like in that little transition zone, literally on the wrong side of the tracks. Their leasing agent was in LA, and they were like, we can't, it's been a year, it doesn't look good. It's an odd sized space. We were required to build this retail by the planning department, even though it didn't really make sense there. So that's another area of innovation, is really from the planning departments looking at what they're requiring builders to do and really asking if that actually supports the maker community and the artists that live there. So just having a bunch of vacant retail obviously doesn't work for the community. It's a drag. It's like just empty storefronts. But there are the significant technical aspect of that Berkeley project that we did that was different was usually those new builds have money tied to the lease signing that they can release for the build out, right? So it's $75 to $150 a square foot. So when the lease is signed, they're like, cool, here's all the money. What do you want to build? And then the business restaurant usually, because they have a lot of investors, puts in some money as well, and they build out the space. So the problem with new build is often it is what's called a cold shell. There's no electrical, no drywall, no flooring. So, a tiny, scrappy independent retailer is not going to put in 200 grand to build out a space, even if the builder puts in money. It just doesn't work for selling, socks and yarn. But, so we said, hey, if you want to support independent retail, and you want this space active for your residents, and you want this to be a place where your residents can come, spend the money up front. And it's Avalon Bay Communities. It's a very national, super corporate. It's like one of the biggest real estate developers in the country. And they were like, yeah, what? We don't do that. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's what you're going to have to do. Like, no one else is going to build out this space for you. So they're like, oh, all right. So that's how we were able to work with their architect to design the space just for the pop-up program, because they paid $150 to make that happen. So that was a huge barrier that we lowered for different businesses to come in and test out that space over the pop-up program. And then one was like, this is like a dream space, so they signed a long-term lease. So as long as we like the spaces to be turnkey, we like them to be small. Like 1,500 is a little big for most retailers that are just starting out, but she was doing these classes, so she had that space well utilized as a second revenue stream. But yeah, if you're in the real estate community, we just suggest 500 square feet is kind of the sweet spot for this incubation idea.
Thank you.
Yes?
So say there is an existing retail location or office location that's empty, and you want to approach the owner or the manager. What is the kind of vocabulary, what is the dialogue, and how do you first approach that? Do you have a kind of a plan that we would follow if we wanted to do that?
Yeah, it depends. Places are vacant for very different reasons. So it's not always, so finding out what the reason is really important. And then we found the best success is when, the property owner has more than one space. So you get that cluster, the benefit of clustering, and you can create a little bit of destination. They can feed off each other, and then you can justify the marketing of multiple spaces, not just one pop-up on this side of town and then another one. It's too hard to get it in the minds of the consumer, But if you have one space that's big enough to have multiple pop-ups within it, as a marketplace style, then that can work. But yeah, it's determining the the reason that it's vacant. And then, so then you can figure out where they are on that bell curve and whether it's worth their time to keep, pursue it. But there has to be a benefit to them to do it. And so, we have 3 workshops that we do. One is to cities, like how can you adapt this pop-up to permanent program to support people who maybe have their eye on the spot or want to take it over as an operator and run their own pop-up incubation out of that space. So having the city kind of already geared towards supporting that in different ways. There's a tenant improvement program where they can invest money on the facade or give money for signage or help with marketing. So there's very specific structural ways that cities can support the program, and it makes some of the property owners feel like, oh, I'm participating in like a thing that's like a whole program and I get money from the city in order to make this happen, right? So it's not them investing in the space on their own, because maybe they've, who knows, like over 20 years of owning a building, lots of administrations come and go, and sometimes you can run up against like, well, we did this, and we put all this money in, and that never happened, so you can get like all kinds of pushback from property owners unless they feel like they're supported in a specific way.
So the city could employ you to do that?
Yeah, and we have another workshop that we do that's just for property owners. So that works well if several property owners along a designated stretch of the district that's like, we want to revitalize this district, or we have support money from another nonprofit to like catalyze this area. So then we can do a workshop with several property owners together and say like, look, you can all do this and here are the benefits, and then we can kind of explain the benefits to them all at once, and then we can talk about some of the marketing that's offered through the program and ways in which that helps reposition their property or try out different uses for their tenancy. Maybe they, maybe it was something 20 years ago and they don't know about co-working spaces or creative entrepreneurs and how it can be repurposed to be like a creative office or a design suite or even like a maker space. So it's just getting them kind of caught up with where retail is today. And then another workshop we do specifically for creative entrepreneurs of like, here's how you sign a short-term lease, here are some templates, here's how you do a walkthrough, here's how you understand the first 3 months of your pop-up, here's how you can market something that's temporary. So we kind of go through those 3 different sectors through those workshops.
Is there some analysis of the pop-ups that you've helped establish? I don't know if it's mostly in the Bay Area or if it's all over. So do they last for X amount of time, and then do they close down because the landlords found a substantially higher paying tenant? Or do they continue and some people from within that pop-up end up paying rent and continue the pop-up? I mean, how do the pop-ups end usually?
Yeah, it's a really good question because when we started, there was 35% vacancy in downtown Oakland, so it's really high.
Yeah.
So, it was the valley of the recession. So the attitude for everyone was like, sure, why not? We'll try it. Like, we don't have anything else going on, right? So the rents were below market rate, especially when you look at the neighboring city of San Francisco, right? So it was it was super affordable and therefore attractive for these entrepreneurs. But like a new entrepreneur will typically think of a long-term lease as 5 years. That's as far as their brain can go usually. And so we usually try to build in like another option for 5 years after that, just to cushion them a little bit. Like, hey, when your lease is up, your business is usually done. It's very hard to transition a business elsewhere. So we try to get them thinking really long term and build that into their initial lease. We also do a graduated rent, so we try to work with the landlords to like determine just below market rent, and then we graduate the rent up commensurate with their own equity in their business. So if they're, so year 2, maybe it's a little bit more, year 3, it's a little bit more, and we kind of, over a couple of years, graduate that rent increase to be commensurate with like perceived market rate, which isn't always accurate, but just sometimes a landlord has a vacancy because they perceive that they can get $3 a square foot, even though most people are paying $1.50, because they're just kind of waiting for whatever that tipping point is. Another strategy that we can't control, but we try to strategize around is the gentrification aspect, which is really intense in LA and Oakland and other major cities that are really feeling that. So it helps that it's local businesses, and they're reinvesting 68 cents to the dollar back into their local communities. So that is, to us, like an anti-gentrification strategy, because we're supporting local entrepreneurs investing in their own communities. But there are just larger market forces that happen, and so we are surprised by the swift change in Oakland. So even after just 6 years, a lot of our entrepreneurs that we worked with went through a series of different experiences, and they're all different. So some of them easily expanded into a vacant space next door. So having a flexible space that allows for expansion is really important. Some of them, after 1 or 2 years, they moved into a much larger space and then signed a much longer lease. So they didn't all stay in one neighborhood. They kind of found their homes. And another one is really, the building sold that we did this original project in for a $25 million profit in 2014, I think, 15. So, so that put a lot of new pressures on those retail spaces because it was a new owner, and they were doing all kinds of remodeling and sort of tried to raise the prices as much as possible, and so they were really struggling with well, we built this neighborhood and now we're not going to pay $5 a square foot, because Oakland, even though it's popular, it still doesn't have a spending the population is actually only 400,000, so it just didn't support that fast of a spike. And there's also just a lot of changes that are happening in retail. So, I mean, not everyone makes it, obviously. So we try to just keep the growth consistent with the potential growth for those retailers rather than an arbitrary, perceived market value of rent. I think a really important way that the retailers that have been the most successful have 50 to 75% of their revenue online. So we don't even work with retailers unless they have a social media strategy and an online store, because there's no way you can just pop up in a transitional neighborhood and then make 10 grand a month. You're not going to happen in your first year. But if you have that big following and you have the ability for people who maybe come through town and then leave and then buy it later, this circular way that people actually shop now through online accessibility and offline experiences in the retail, then they have some financial wherewithal to weather an uptick in rent. I got really technical, sorry. Yeah.
Question. So you're looking at, in your experience when you've done these types of projects, is most of what's happening to support those spaces coming from the local community? And based on that answer, is there a component that can relate to tourism or attracting people from an outside area to support things like this? Or is it really just focused on the local community?
No, I think that's a driver for economic development, the retail and any placemaking efforts have to do both. You have to galvanize the local people to feel like it's theirs and support it, and hopefully it's filling a need, right? It's preventing retail leakage, so they're shopping local as opposed to shopping somewhere else, right? And so you're retaining some of this spending power of the local community through that program. But the marketing that we did was really, it was national papers that really picked up this story of this struggling Oakland neighborhood that made good, and
And it was such an unusual, positive story for the town at that time that it was just really, you know, it charmed a lot of people to be like, oh wow, look, if Oakland could do it, anything's possible, you know. So it felt really like catalytic in that way to reframe the narrative of a struggling city, like a post-industrial working class struggling city. And there are other cities like Detroit and New Orleans that also had to reframe their narratives in the wake of natural disasters or just an industrial like recovery process that Detroit is still in. So I think it did capture the attention of people in Portland, and other people were like, yeah, well, let's just check out what's happening in Oakland. What's all the buzz about, you know? And so we actually got people who were visiting Oakland for the first time in 2012 just to see this one neighborhood, which was like unheard of for Oakland, where people weren't just going there to check out Oakland before, right? So that was a huge shift in just public perception that, hey, there's lots of artists, like there was also some capital investments that Oakland did kind of parallel that really sparked people's interest. Like they restored their historic theater, the Fox Theater. So there were like, you know, multiple points where it kind of coalesced and people were like, something's going on there. And the stories that we were telling were about like, from the perspective of people who lived there and loved the city and really were talking about like how amazing these entrepreneurs were and how things that we, you know, very personal things that we loved about Oakland, we were putting in this national context of like, cities are changing. Cities can be altered by civic participation of just citizens who really want to own their own neighborhoods, because Oakland was, nobody was going to come and rescue Oakland. And so this idea of like, we did it because we wanted to, and we didn't, you know, we didn't go through a long planning process, you know, we just like tried something and it worked. And so a lot of other cities were doing that as well, trying different things, and some things were working. And it was creating these little pockets, these little network nodes of innovators, which was like mirroring kind of how the internet was working. And so it's changing our ideas of cities as these stagnant things to like, you know, people were moving a lot, and they're choosing, young millennials are choosing cities to be like, oh, where does it look like stuff's happening? And so there was like also responding to the idea of possibility and innovation and making that visible. So just marketing was like an aspect of making that more visible to more people. But it definitely, like that, that style of like featuring like a really good photo of the entrepreneur, you know, on like Broadway Street has been adopted now by the official like marketing of Oakland. So that's like and you know, you can see that in Amex commercials, and they've actually used some of our pop-up clients in their national campaigns. So there's just marketing itself has changed to be much more personal and much more like aspirational, and like you can do it. So I think we were just like feeling that zeitgeist in the moment, running with that. So Oakland's whole marketing strategy is like way less top-down and much more like oriented towards tourism now. Yeah.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about the mission-driven entrepreneurs. So where do those missions come from? Do they tend to be generated by the people themselves, or do you work with them to develop, you know, like, okay, great product, but where's your idea? What's your purpose?
No, that comes just solely from their own like experience or their own sense of purpose or their own, you know, work in the community.
And then do the retail expectations differ for that kind of space? And do you help them support that with like grant funding and things like that? So I'm thinking about the one, what was it, Regina's Door.
Yeah.
You know, it just seems like that vintage shop can't possibly bring in enough retail to support all those other activities she's doing that also seem like they would be really grant supportable too. So does she do that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, for her, like she's got a lot of different facets to her mission. So she gets a lot of public support and just donations. So a lot of her inventory comes from just people who support her mission. They just drop off the clothes. You know, students do consignment. They're just like, you know, here's all my great stuff, you know. And she uses some of that, you know, to clothe the kids, and some of it to sell, and some of it to do costuming for other theater productions. So there's just a whole constellation of things that she's worked out that intersect with her mission in different ways. And she, you know, because the retail is only 500 square feet, it's $1.50 square foot, it's affordable. So that's not draining her financial resources, but it's not fully funding them either, you know. So she gets paid to consult for the OPD work she does. So she, you know, she's just like so heart-centered. She's building shelters. She got money donated and raised funds to build like 3 different shelters already, which is really hard to do in a real estate market like Oakland. So she's just found, you know, her purpose, and she's on that path, and her passion and her like love and joy like gravitate people to her that just want to help. And I was one of them. And then I got the developer was also one of them. And occasionally he gifts her with a free month of rent because he just likes what she's doing. And he sees that their office is like across the street from her store, and he sees all the activity that she's bringing that's so positive to the neighborhood. And her door is always open, and she's so lovely. And so it's, you know, he's happy to support her in the long term. So I think other, you know, the black squirrel, like her revenue is nuts. Like she's doing great financially. She was doing great month 2. So she doesn't need grants. She's just killing it with a really good product and really supporting her community that she built up over 7 years. So, you know, she's, so a lot of them don't need subsidy and like so to continue to do their work. And as a social entrepreneur, it's for profit, for good. So I think there are a lot of models where you can bend your like classic, you know, for-profit enterprise and then also have a mission.
Okay, sir, I think that's all the time we have. So
thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.